Hello, friends, and welcome to Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and help you engage with public policy in the great state of Texas. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and today we're wrapping up the primary elections with Texas Impact's Advocacy Director, Joshua Houston. I know many of you put your heart and soul into these races. Some had the turnouts you hoped for, and others didn't. But I want to thank everyone who voted, organized your friends and congregations, volunteered for a campaign, or helped work the election. Some of you even put your name forward to run for office. So I want to say a big thanks to all of you who put in the time and effort to make a difference for your community. Thank you. That said, after this election, there is still a lot of work to do. Many of you live in districts with runoff elections, and so it's even more important that you engage your community over the next 2 months. But everyone listening has an election that I believe will be critical for democracy in our local communities, at the state level and nationwide later this fall. So I hope you're preparing yourself to do everything you can to make sure your community and congregation are active participants in democracy this year. As always, Texas Impact has tools and resources for you, so make sure to check out the Texas Faith Votes page at texasimpact.org to learn more about that campaign. Or you can always contact me at scott@texasimpact.org if you have any questions or need help getting started. But that's enough wind up for today. Let's welcome to the conversation Texas Impact's Advocacy Director, Joshua Houston. Joshua Houston, welcome back to the program. I know it has been a busy week for you watching the election results come in. We're going to talk about that, but how's life otherwise?
Oh, it's going all right, Scott. How are you?
Life is grand. Spring break is coming and the kids are excited. So we take the political lens off. Life is fantastic.
I am excited for a bit of a break. We've been going hard for about 6 months now and wouldn't mind a bit of a break.
We have. It's been good seeing you and all of our members in person all throughout the state leading up to the primary elections, which we're going to be talking about today. So why don't we go ahead and jump in? Josh, throughout the state of Texas, and for the last lots of months, we've been talking about the importance of the primary elections that took place this week. And we've talked about public education being at the forefront of those conversations. As our listeners know, many traditional Republicans supported public schools and opposed the governor's voucher plan all throughout last year. And those traditional Republicans who supported public schools were challenged by well-funded MAGA wing Republicans endorsed by the governor. There was a lot of money in those races. And I think we've all seen the headlines. It was a bad night for traditional pro-public education Republicans. Josh, talk to us. How bad was it?
Yeah, so I want to make a distinction. I'm not sure how much, the effect will certainly be felt for public education. I'm not sure how much the voters really were rejecting public education versus just kind of embracing more extremism generally. What was in the mind of the voters is still going to be parsed out in the days and weeks to come. But the distinction doesn't really matter that much because the effect will certainly be felt. We just don't have the votes to block school vouchers anymore. So let's back up a little bit and say, if you've ever heard me talk for a decade now, frankly, going back to the election of Lieutenant Governor Patrick, I've described the dynamic of the Texas legislature as a medieval war movie where the Senate is laying siege to the House. The House is the castle. And the whole purpose being for purification in purifying the Republican Party, really in the war between the traditionalists. The traditional business community controlled the House, the extremists controlled the Senate. The whole point being this kind of civil war was playing out between the two chambers. What happened on Tuesday is that one side prevailed, frankly. The House is lost. And honestly, the Court of Criminal Appeals is probably lost too, although that's a little bit more inside baseball, but we shouldn't neglect it. because what happened there was the Court of Criminal Appeals restrained the powers of the Attorney General to bring criminal prosecutions, as is the Texas Constitution, gives that power to district attorneys, not the state. It was a correct legal ruling, and nevertheless, it was used as a way to reject three justices that correctly ruled that the Attorney General had no such powers. It's arcane, but we're going to feel it here in what's to come. Of course, the bigger reverberations, I think, that will be seen are in the Texas House, where the last number I had yesterday was 8, although I've seen the number 9. So it's either 8 or 9 incumbents that have been defeated by far-right challengers. That is a record. The largest number before that was 7, and that happened in 2012 and 2014. And so really that kind of finishes off the situation, because 8 have been defeated for sure, possibly 9. And another 8 have been forced into runoffs on top of the 8 or 9 that won't be returning. One of those that was forced to run off was the Speaker of the House. And I think it is very hard to see how the Speaker of the House remained Speaker of the House when there was such a seismic shift in the Republican Party as we knew it. The traditional wing of the Republican Party, the business wing of the Republican Party, is officially now it's officially out of power. Effectively, we just haven't seen how it's going to all shake out just yet in detail. But that was certainly the message that was sent by Republican primary voters as the extremist wing prevailed just in a big way on Tuesday, and we're going to feel that for at least 2 years to come.
Yeah, one of the things you said at the beginning of that answer is that we framed this as a conversation about public education. We talked about that for months, right? But I live in and near a couple of those districts that were hotly contested, and public education was not the issue that was getting the most airtime and ads and on my Facebook feed. There's a lot of conversation about immigration and border issues and that kind of thing in those races. That said, this will have an impact on vouchers, and you mentioned that. So what is the impact on public education as we move towards next legislative session? Yeah,
that's right. I mean, we certainly did our best over 6 months to try to make sure the public understood that the fight was about public education. Yeah, Scott, did you see a whole lot of that in the advertising where you live?
No. And in fact, it was really hard to find the positions, because I had to reach out to some of the offices to ask them, because they certainly weren't advertising that they were pro voucher. I had a back and forth with one candidate who I asked 3 different times what his position was on vouchers. And he kept saying it was clear. And I was like, well, it's not. My reading comprehension is pretty high, and I don't understand what you're trying to say here. So
what was the advertising
it was definitely
about?
Not out there.
I know you asked the question. I know you asked the questions, but what was the advertising about where you lived?
Oh, I mean, it was all about the border and immigration.
Yeah, I mean, I ask you, Scott, because you're in Huntsville and I'm in Austin, Texas, and we saw very different things. So yeah, no, it was all about the border. And if you read the fine print, you would see that those ads about the border were being paid for by political action committees that were actually for vouchers. And so I'm doing this intentionally to bring up that, yes, I mean, the advertising was about the border, but it was being done by the voucher side, which brings me to the mathematical problem we have and why we are so certain that we don't have the votes to stop vouchers. So the original vote on the Rainey Amendment, to remove vouchers from House Bill 1, that was done on a vote of 84 to 63. And there are 150 members in the Texas House, just for reference. So 76 is a majority. So if the original vote was 84 to 63, and 76 is a majority, and we know for sure that there were 10 Republicans that voted with the 84 who were anti-voucher and will not be back. Of those 10, 6 lost. The other 4 retired and were replaced in open seats by pro-voucher candidates. And then you have an additional 4 on top of that 10 that are forced into a runoff. So it could grow from 10 to 14. But let's just say 10. 84 minus 10 is 74. 74 is not a majority of the Texas House. 76 is a majority in the Texas House. That means we do not have the votes to stop vouchers in Texas in a best case scenario.
And so now that the good chunk of the primary election is in the rearview mirror, we do know that we have some very important runoff elections in May. And for those who have runoff elections in your district, those are even more important, right? Probably even lower turnout elections. You have some real work to do. So any advice to folks in those districts where they are having runoffs?
Yeah, so we know of at least 8 runoffs, 4 of them being for the pro-public education candidates. So the conversation will shift in the legislature. And frankly, we'll have to try to mitigate damage. And if you're trying to mitigate the damage to public education, it would be still very important for those 4 public education Republicans to be returned to office, because we're going to have to try to mitigate the harm. And so to have empirical data in the election returns from the runoff where Trump is not on the ticket and Trump is not turning out the extremist wing as much, and to have the community return those 4 folks would still be of a benefit to public education as we go into the mitigation of the damage that's going to happen with vouchers.
Now, Josh, for about 12 months, you've been telling people anytime they ask not to talk about November, not to talk about November, not to talk about November, because we all needed to be talking about March 5th. It's probably getting very close to the time where we need to start considering the impact that November general elections will have on public policy in Texas. So what should we be watching for as we move towards November? Will that have any impact on public education in Texas?
Not in the short run, but we need to think about time horizons and strategy, right? Because in the short run, no. The math in the legislature works like this, where 6 Republicans do not equal 6 Democrats. In other words, the party in power sees the writing on the wall. And the remaining Republicans that are opposed to vouchers are likely to collapse because they have seen what has happened to their colleagues in other districts. And they've experienced it themselves, frankly. So there's not a way that 6 Democrats could be elected that would replace those 6 Republicans where we would all be fine and there's no vouchers. So in the short run, no, we're having vouchers. In a best case scenario, well, what if Democrats took the House? Well, that's not realistic. That would require gaining 12 seats. And there are maybe, and this is being generous, maybe 10 seats that are considered swing. Swing being defined as a district that is 55 to 45 or narrower in its percentages, single digits in the percentage difference between the parties. Now, if you look at those 10, and even being generous to those 10, well, 4 of those 10 are occupied by Democrats playing defense. So there's just no mathematical way that's realistic where Democrats take back the Texas House. But I said that's in the short run. We have to start thinking long-term in our strategy. And again, we are an issue organization, not a partisan organization. So this is analysis. But the Democratic Party has not done Democratic voters any favors. Where for 20 years I've observed them say, this is it. This is our year. Well, and then it never is. And they're doing this thing that's like Lucy and the football from, the cartoon Peanuts with Snoopy, where Charlie Brown goes to kick the football and Lucy pulls the football away, and it happens over and over and over and over and over again, and Charlie Brown keeps going for it. Well, that just leads to demoralization. It leads to apathy. It leads to cynicism. It's not good for morale. It would be better, in our opinion, and at least in this sense, we're thinking about issues here, not parties. but an incremental approach where, in November, if Democrats picked up 4 seats and they ran on public education, well, that would send a signal, wouldn't it? It would not be enough to stop vouchers, but it would begin to send the empirical signal that is necessary to start to reverse this trend. Because then, from a statewide perspective, the goal should be for Colin Allred to lose by less than 5 percentage points, because that's getting back into the trend lines that we've seen over the decade, and begins to send a signal that would have to be repeated in 26 and then in 28. And, if you pick up 4 seats in 24, you pick up 4 seats in 26, you pick up 4 more seats in 28, then you're looking at the numbers you need, and you're looking at the trend lines you need to begin to send the empirical signal that they need to moderate in a general election, and that they actually have something to fear in a general election. So we would encourage that level of incrementalism as a long-term thing, but in the short run, there's just not really a realistic path forward to stop vouchers in November.
Yeah, in the primary elections, a lot of the districts that were at play that folks were watching were in more rural parts of the state. Is that where are we looking as we move towards November?
Looking towards suburbia. So to be blunt about it, I mean, we were looking at the primaries in the more rural parts of the state. The rural parts of the state are 75-25 Republican to Democrat. They have been 75-25 for 20 years. They are not in any way trending any more blue. If you're looking at data and just being driven by data, the rural areas of the state are just getting redder and redder and redder. And that means the Republican primary is going to decide. And if rural voters want to support their public schools, it's got to be in the Republican primary in the rural areas. That did not happen. And the effects of that will be felt with what comes with vouchers. As we go to November, as we think about this incremental strategy, you begin to look at suburban and urban Texas. Suburban Texas being 50-50. Depending on turnout, turnout really depends on which party wins in suburbia. It's why there's so many fights happening at a school board level. It's why there's just so many fights happening in general in suburbia, is because of this. That's the epicenter of the culture wars, frankly. And then you look at urban Texas, and it's the opposite of rural Texas. It is 70-30 Democrat to Republican. So urban Texas, of course, is heavily Democrat, but urban Texas does not in any way vote in the same. The turnout in the rural areas is always higher. The lowest turnout is often in urban Texas, and urban Texas just is not asserting itself at the ballot box. Don't take my word for it. Just go look at the race for Beto O'Rourke between 2018 and 2022. If you break down turnout by county, what you will see is that the rural counties in Texas had no drop-off in turnout. They were just as enthusiastic to vote in 22 as they were in 2018. And again, just to remind everybody, Beto O'Rourke lost by 2.5 points in 2018, and Beto O'Rourke lost by 11 points in 2022. So rural turnout was the same. Being 75-25 out there. Suburban turnout dropped a bit, but it's 50-50, so it pretty much cancels each other out. But then you got to look at the 5 urban counties: Dallas, Harris, Bexar, Travis, and El Paso. And if you look at just those 5 counties that are 70-30 Democrat to Republican, they had a 10% drop in turnout on average when you average those 5 counties together. And that is the difference between Beto O'Rourke losing by 2.5 and Beto O'Rourke losing by 11 points, is just the turnout in those 5 counties. So urban Texas, you're not asserting yourself, and that is a big reason why we are feeling the policy effects that we're feeling in the state.
You mentioned school board races, and one of the things I know you've been working on for the last several months has been the public school defenders team that has been organizing in local school districts on a chaplain's bill issue that we'll talk about momentarily. But in those conversations over the last few months, I know you've talked about the importance of prioritizing local races and getting involved in grassroots efforts in places where you live, where a couple dozen or a couple hundred people can make an impact. You've really prioritized that as a strategy. So say a few words about that.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I'd love to. There are a number of reasons why we think prioritizing local is the strategy. One is just pragmatic and for your mental health. The presidential race is just going to be bad for your mental health. Let's be real. It's bad for mine. It's bad for all of us. And Washington, D.C. is very far away. And if we're being real about it, it's going to come down to a few 100,000 voters in a handful of swing states. That's the way it's been for a while. And so your power is very, very, very minimal. It's just fractions of math, right? So when you think about the fraction that is your vote, it is fractionally larger and more potent, most potent, really, at the local level. And when I say local, I mean cities, city councils, county commissioners, and school boards. And so we would encourage you, if you're getting civically engaged, to focus your civic engagement and the limited time and limited resources you have on your community, being your local governments, for a couple more reasons, which is the local elected officials are much more accessible to you. In other words, if you have a crowd of 50 people, you're likely to get a local elected official running for office coming out because they struggle. And plus the fraction of your vote is so much more potent, they can't afford to go do that kind of retail politics. And that retail politics is important because you get to know them on a personal level while they are still very close to you at the local level, and you get a sense for who they are as people in a way that's just not possible at the scale of a governor or a president. Another big reason is that local governments still have to pick up the trash. They still have to make the buses run on time. They still have to fill the potholes. They're still solving problems. School boards are, looking at bonds and vendor contracts. And for the most part, like if you're trying to make government function, whether it be your county, your city, your school board, when you're really trying to make that kind of thing happen, there's still very sane people that are still present in your local community. We say that because we've been working with them on this project we're about to talk about. But there's still a lot of sanity and wisdom at a local community level. Also, think about baseball or your favorite sport, whatever it may be. There's what's called farm teams or minor league teams or, leagues that where people go to get better. And so local government is the farm team for what will eventually be the next statewide candidates or state-level candidates. And then the state level is often where people then go to higher office in Washington, D.C. That's just how it works. It filters up. And so you want to be able to build a bench, to build people who can then run for office, because you never know when a seat's going to be open or when somebody needs to be challenged. You've got to have people ready to go at all times. And then from a final pragmatic reason, especially if we're going to have really bad policy from the state legislature for the foreseeable future, it's local government that is going to implement whatever it is coming down from the state. And they can implement that, well, there's flexibility in implementation. Let's put it that way. And that flexibility can show up in a number of ways. See the CRT bill. I know we were all at an event where a Methodist woman said to us that they've quit doing Black History Month in her school district because of the CRT bill. And I said, well, that's interesting because the CRT bill arguably doesn't actually prohibit that. And some local school boards are responding in a fear-based way and just saying, oh, forget about that. Let's just don't do Black History Month. It's too controversial here. Well, it's a local decision. Because in my daughter's school district, they are absolutely still doing Black History Month. I know because I went to a poetry reading and saw the wall of the school library where they had a number of books for Black History Month, celebrating Black History Month. So my point here is to say is that there are choices that get made in the implementation of state policy that happen at a local level, and those choices are completely being responsive to the demands of local voters. And, you see that on any number of issues.
And so speaking of local impact, talk to us some about the impact you all have made as a public school defender team. You had a press conference last week. You had a really big success. I want to celebrate that and use that as an example of the impact that folks can make in their local community.
That's right. There is still good news. This has been kind of probably a rougher weekly witness to listen to. But again, let's end on a ray of hope, especially at the local level, where one of the examples of how the state can implement or not implement comes from this so-called school chaplain bill. And I say so-called because there is not and should not be a thing called public school chaplains. That's just a complete violation of all things America with the religious pluralism that exists in our public schools that are for everyone. We're pleased to report that public schools are still safe for every faith. We say that because there was a school chaplain bill. We've talked about it a lot, but just to recap for anybody who is a new listener, they want to create a position called public school chaplain to do God knows what, because it wasn't defined in the bill, in the public school system. And I'm not just being pejorative. I mean, there really is no job description in the bill or the legislation. And there was, however, a provision that required each school district to take a vote on whether or not to create such a position in the schools. And, we're pleased to say that we know this. Tracking 1,200 school boards is just darn near impossible. But we were able to do so because of our Public School Defender Action Team, which is really just made up of members like you who have the time and capacity to go out and lobby their local school boards. Texas Impact staff did not set foot in a single school district. It was all done by the members of Texas Impact, and specifically with the bulk of the work being done by our Public School Defender Action Team, where they went out to their local school boards and monitored the agendas and talked to their trustees and did the work of citizen lobbyists. And they got 104 districts that we're aware of to reject this idea. And, those 104 school districts are, we calculated the population, the student population, and it is a majority, 50.5%. of the students in Texas attend one of those 104 school districts. And, it is a statistical sample, but it's a pretty good statistical sample because from their experience, we can tell that this was the overwhelming trend. We did not see an appetite for this in hardly any school district that we encountered. We're aware of maybe two that we can't confirm that may have adopted some sort of position called public school chaplain, but we haven't seen the final resolution, the language of the final resolutions. So we can't even say that for sure. There just was no appetite for it. I mean, Scott, we love sports metaphors. Would you take a 104-2 record on a basketball team or a baseball team?
Yeah, it's pretty solid. Your Bulls, even back in the Jordan days, would have even loved that record.
That is right. The Chicago Bulls of Michael Jordan did not even accomplish a record like that. So, and this happened because ordinary, and I think this is the most important point, ordinary people of faith got engaged at a local level, talked to their locally elected school board trustees, and evidence that there is still wisdom in the communities of Texas. And there's a lesson to be learned there. Right now, we are having national politics from the top down really polarize our state at the state level. That is unfortunately the result of March 5th. The lesson from March 5th's election is that the Republican primary voters in Texas want the Republican Party in Texas to act more like the Republicans in Washington, D.C. But there is that still, again, if you look at percentage of voter turnout, is not the vast majority of Texans. And the vast majority of Texans can still make a difference by engaging locally. And as we begin to try to endure what is to come and frankly, get Texas back on the right track in the years to come.
Yeah, I agree with you on the local approach. And I think we've certainly seen fruit from that work through the public school defenders engaging in the school boards. I just want to make sure we're framing the conversation in a way that folks understand. I care about who my state representative is. I care about who our Texas senator is. I care about who the president of the United States is. And so the most effective way to support those candidates is to get involved locally with local folks and turn people out for every election. And when those folks vote for local people, they'll vote on up the ballot as well. So you'll also be supporting all of those other races that you care about when you are supporting local candidates, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, think about this. I mean, what better inoculant So what happened in Texas was that literally tens of millions of dollars poured in from groups that are financially interested in privatizing the public school system. Did they say that was what they were doing? No. They poured those tens of millions of dollars into attack ads, attacking them on the border and just whatever is most inflaming the voters at this particular moment in history. The way you inoculate against misinformation is to be deeply involved in your community. And this is going to take years. But imagine if 10 years ago, you had a whole bunch of people working with, say, a state representative who was on their school, who was a current state representative. But let's back up 10 years to when that state representative was serving on the local school board. Now imagine if the community was deeply engaged with that school board and they knew that trustee and they had a 10-year relationship with them. And that trustee runs for state representative, gets elected, and then goes to Austin and votes for public schools. Well, when all those attack ads pour in, everybody would know, oh, well, that's just not true. I know that person. I've been engaged with them for 10 years. That's not what that person did. And imagine how different the election returns might have been if all that work had occurred 10 years ago. Well, it didn't happen, but it still can. And we got to get started now on what should have been done 10 years ago.
All right, friends, we have a challenge in front of us. There is work to do. Josh, anything to add before we close out today?
No, it's just, it's going to be, no, I don't have much to add. I think I've kind of rubbed the salt in the wound. It's going to be a little bit of pain. Well, it could be a lot of pain, frankly. But there is still hope. And we just got to get to work and begin to think long term.
All right, friends, you've heard the challenge from Josh. We certainly have work to do, and it all starts in our local communities. I hope you'll spend some time in the coming weeks finding a candidate that you like and start there. Again, Texas Impact has tools for you to engage your congregation and community, so check out texasimpact.org and take a look at all of the tools and resources on the Texas Faith Votes page. As always, please feel free to reach out if you have questions or need additional support. My email is scott@texasimpact.org. While you're on the website, I hope you'll support this podcast by subscribing and sharing it, and by joining Texas Impact as a member. We could not do this without your support. All right, y'all, I think that's enough for today. So with that, I think it's time we close out this episode. So remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnet, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact. People of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.